Good afternoon and welcome to the Oxford Cannabinoid Technologies Holdings PLC investor presentation. Throughout this recorded presentation, investors will be in listen-only mode. Questions are encouraged and can be submitted at any time by the Q&A tab situated in the right-hand corner of your screen. Just simply type in your questions and press send. The company may not be in a position to answer every question it receives during the meeting itself. However, the company will review all questions submitted today and publish responses where it is appropriate to do so. Before we begin, I'd like to submit the following poll. And I'd now like to hand you over to Clarissa Soamima-Coker, CEO. Good afternoon.
Thank you very much, and thanks everybody for taking the time to join us for this Investor Meet Company presentation from Oxford Cannabinoid Technologies Holdings PLC on our interim results for the period ending the 31st of October 2022, which already to me feels like a long time ago. I don't know about anybody else, but that's what we're here to talk about today. We're joined by obviously myself, Clarissa Soamima-Coker, and our Finance Director, Paul Smalley. Paul's going to be taking us through the numbers as we get to them, and I'll hand over to him at the appropriate time. But before that, I'm just going to give those of us who might need a little refresher or who might be new to our story an introduction into what OCT is here to do, the problem we're trying to solve. And then I'll give you over to Paul for the financial highlights from the period and the sort of the detail there. And then it will be back to me for an operational update of everything that happened in that 6-month period and a couple of post-period highlights too. Okay, so in terms of timing, we are expecting to take probably about half an hour here or about, and then we'll have time for questions, as we've said at the beginning there. So do submit them along the way and we'll get to as many as we can. So quick introduction to OCT then. We are a pharmaceutical company developing next generation non-addictive medications to replace opioids. So we're trying to tackle the very severe problem of the opioid crisis, which I'm sure we're all familiar with. We're looking at the pain market. It's a very large global market of almost 60 billion pounds at the present time, which is estimated to grow to 74 billion, 74.7 billion pounds by first launch, which is just around 2027, 28. We've got a diversified pipeline with 4 drug development programs. Our program 1, is about to enter phase 1, and I'll talk a bit more about that further down the track. We're looking at large and orphan indications, mainly looking at that IP protection and market exclusivity, which is all important for our investors and our shareholders. We're taking those drug candidates through robust clinical trials so that we can get physicians, get them in the hands of patients, but physicians can prescribe with confidence and insurance companies, importantly, can reimburse. So who are we and what are we doing? So we're a pharmaceutical company in name and nature, essentially. We are taking those drug candidates that I've just talked about through those robust clinical trials so that, we can make specific claims to treat particular pain indications. So that is in contrast to medical cannabis, for instance, which can't make those claims and doesn't have the market exclusivity that drugs that have gone through the proper regulatory or the traditional regulatory pathway can get. So we're looking for that regulatory approval from those global regulators like the FDA in the US, MHRA here in the UK, EMA in Europe, so that we get those medicines ultimately into the hands of patients and with doctors having the confidence to prescribe them. And then also as a follow-up, and particularly important for the US market, and there's a question on this later, so it's a useful point, particularly for the US market, so that those medicines are reimbursable to the patient by insurance companies. So very, very big issue in the US is that medical cannabis there isn't reimbursable at the moment. So really important to have licensed medicines that are approved by the regulatory agencies so that we get that coverage from an IP perspective, that approval, confidence for physicians and confidence also for patients. So the next slide, sorry, one second. There we go. The next slide just talks about a little bit in more depth about the market that we're looking for, right? So I've told you we're going for the global pain market. It's a huge market, as I've said, about 60 billion pounds at the moment. That's the total global pain market at the present time. Our first focus really is in the neuropathy and visceral pain market in that space, and that is presently worth about 19 billion pounds. So it's a very significant area. Our first two indications that I'll talk a bit more about in a moment are CIPN, or chemotherapy-induced peripheral neuropathy, which is a bit of a mouthful, but really is talking about it's a side effect that happens if you're taking chemo to treat cancer, causing pain and sensitivity in the extremities. So CIPN, that's our first indication. And the second is trigeminal neuralgia, or TN, which is a severe type of facial pain, which is very inhibitive and inhibiting, and can have patients can have up to 100 attacks a day, which are very severe and difficult to deal with. So again, together, those two indications by 2030 will be worth about 5.1 billion pounds in terms of the market size, and therefore it's a significant patient population and a significant problem to solve. Looking now just at the timeline, or rather the milestones that we have been ticking off along the way to getting to our phase 2, which will be later this year. So you'll all be aware, of course, that we listed on the main market of the London Stock Exchange in May of 2021. That was a very big moment for us because it allowed us to get the funds in order to do all of the work that we've been beavering away at since that time. So the last 18 or so months, a little over 18 months. In July of 2021, we signed up Evotec as our preclinical partner for our program 1, phase 1. So in order to get us to this phase 1 that we're about to start, we needed to do all the preclinical work for that program. We signed up Evotec to do that, and one of the big updates for this period is that most of that preclinical work was completed by period end. So in fact, just after period end in December of 2022, we received the submission ready document from Evotec, which allowed us to complete our clinical trial application and submit that in January. A bit more of that later on. Then later that year, so later in 21, in September, we in-licensed exclusively the entire cannabinoid derivative library from Canopy Growth, which is a very big addition to our asset, or sort of our drug development portfolio. We've got now a significant library that we are screening, and that forms the sort of basis of programs 3 and 4. For us, we're working with a company called Dalriada, who actually synthesized the cannabinoid library for Canopy Growth in order to screen and to develop that library, and also a company called Oxford STEMtech, which is run by Professor Zamil Kader, who is an Oxford professor who we at OCT have worked with for a number of years, way before we listed on the main market, and we had a very strong and collaborative relationship with Oxford University. So it's a really nice evolution of that relationship. In March of 22, we announced that CIPN was going to be the target for our lead program, 461201, or the main initial target, at least. We'd had some very promising preclinical results in that model, so that was the reason for going down that route. And then later, and into the period that we're actually talking about, in July of 22, we had the first ever meeting of our scientific advisory board, which was a significant step because that's the sort of the crew, or the bunch of folks, the key opinion leaders who we have onboarded to make sure that our clinical, our strategic approach, the scientific approach that we're taking really aligns with what we should be doing in the clinic as we get through those phase 1, 2, 3 plans, to make sure that what we're doing is delivering what patients need. And obviously that really has to be front of mind here for us at OCT. Then the rest of the period really was all about laying the foundations for what is going to come up in 2023 for us. So it's really about getting that preclinical work done for our lead program 461201, and being able to essentially make sure we'd got everything in place that we needed so that we could file that clinical trial application in line with the timings that we'd set out in the prospectus and in subsequent announcements. So the focus has very much been on delivering what we planned, and also progressing the preclinical stage for our second program too, so that is also ready for phase 1 and will be ready for phase 1 during Q1 of this year now. Just moving on to our commercial partners. So although we are a small team and a lean team, we have what we like to call big pharma capability, because we've worked incredibly hard since listing in May of 2021 to onboard some very significant and world-leading commercial partners. I've mentioned Evotec already. They're very globally recognized for the work that they do, and the program that we've done with them, the Indigo program, in order to complete that preclinical work, has really helped us compress the timeline to get ourselves into the clinic. So getting that phase 1, it's a very compressed timeline. We haven't missed out any steps. It's just been a very efficient way of getting ourselves to the clinic, and it's quite unusual to go from signing up your partner to getting into the clinic in basically just under 18 months. So it's been a very quick turnaround. We're very grateful to them for their work with us on that. You'll see Simbec Orion there on the screen as well. They're our partner for the actual phase 1 for program 1, which we're very excited about, and I'll tell you a bit more about later on. And then in respect to program 2, we've been working continually during the period with our partners, Charles Rivers, Puresis, Oz UK, to get that inhaled device, get the formulation right, and do all the preclinical work that we need in order for that to be ready for phase 1 as well. So it's been a lot of progress over the period. We've continued to work on programs 3 and 4 as well, and that work goes on with Dalriada primarily. Obviously, it's referencing the Canopy growth library and the existing library of compounds that we have at OCT and that is constantly growing. And we're also working with Oxford STEM Tech to do the screening work to develop those programs, which are at the earlier, more discovery stage programs. So that's probably a good little overview of where we're at and sort of what we've been doing. I'll get into a bit more of operational detail in a few minutes, but in the meantime, I'm going to hand over to Paul to give us that financial update for the period. Over to you, Paul.
Okay, thank you, Clarissa, and thank you everybody for joining our call today. So the highlights for OCT for the 6 months through to the 31st of October, the slide we're looking at now is the income statement. So the highlights were that we incurred £4.5 million worth of costs before the provision for R&D tax credits. Approximately 75% of this has been on R&D costs, predominantly from our lead program OCT 461201, which was 1.5 million of those costs incurred, and program 2, 1.2 million pounds has been spent of the 3.1 million research costs, with the residual on programs 3 and 4. Our admin costs for the period were 1.3 million, of which approximately 50% was for salary and the associated costs, and the remainder on your typical professional costs and running costs of a business. So as I said, that means that we've had a cost base of £4.5 million in the 6 months through to 31st of October, with an R&D provision of £840,000 has been provided in the income statement and in the balance sheet for this period. Okay. So moving on to the next slide, so the consequence of our income statement and our performance on what has happened from a cash flow point of view, our cash balance at the end of the period was just under 5 million at £4.93 million. So we've consumed £4.2 million of the cash in the 6 month period, which has been planned since our year end of April 2022. So the upshot of the actions that we've taken and have been announced previously, the cash outlook for OCT is that our cash runway now goes through the remainder of 2023 and into the calendar first quarter of 2024, with significant spend between now and then from an R&D point of view being on the phase 1 trial for our lead program OCT 461201. So the final slide with the actual numbers on is our balance sheet, and it's the condensed balance sheet. Our current assets, which is mostly cash, and the R&D debt, which I just previously mentioned, 4.9 million and 1.6 million respectively for those two items. And our current liabilities are trade payables, almost all, and importantly, we've no debt on the balance sheet currently. So moving on to the financial highlights, just to summarise and to reiterate some of the previous comments, we've got a robust balance sheet with cash at about £5 million at the end of the period of the 31st of October 2022. Because of our actions taken and previous announcements, the cash runway takes us through to Q1 of 2024 following the reordering of our work programme, and that has allowed us cash to be preserved while we concentrate on the lead programme. We have an R&D tax credit provision for £840,000 through this 6-month period, and so with the brought forward from the last financial year, as at the period end, there's approximately £1.5 million worth of R&D debtor on the balance sheet. Okay, that concludes the financial update, and I'll pass you back to Clarissa to continue the presentation.
Thank you, Paul. Okay, folks, so just a little bit more detail on our drug development programs that are currently kind of on deck. I've already mentioned these in passing, but I think it's quite helpful just to refresh our memories on what we're targeting and why. So program 1, 461201, is our in-license compound. We licensed that from a spin-out of Pfizer, and it's a highly potent and selective CB2 agonist. Has no psychoactive properties, but has been shown to reduce pain and inflammation. We're developing that as a capsule that patients will take perhaps twice a day. And the initial indications, as I've mentioned, are CIPN, so chemotherapy-induced peripheral neuropathy, and IBS. We've got some great IBS data when we in-license this compound from the spin-out of Pfizer. But the CIPN work is all our own. That's the promising preclinical work I mentioned a bit earlier on. As I said, so we're due to be getting into our phase 1 essentially now. We submitted our clinical trial application on the 4th of January and had our initial REC meeting. So it's a combined application, MHRA and REC review. We had the REC review meeting on the 11th of January, which went as planned. Everything is moving forward, and we're now just awaiting that MHRA feedback to confirm that we can progress with that phase 1. All being well, the phase 2 for that indication will be able to kick off, subject to funding, in Q3 of this year. That's when we're expecting things to happen. We've got a sort of potential of 20 years market exclusivity here because this is a new chemical entity with patent protection. So that's one of the very exciting things about 461201. The CIPN market, as I've mentioned, is worth about £1.6 billion at the present time, and it's growing at a rate of 6.4% a year. So it is a significant market that we are looking at. IBS being the second focus for that compound, that program. And again, that market is significant, 2.1 billion at the present time and growing at an estimated 9.5%. So they're two very significant market sizes. And of course, when you've got patent protection, that's how you protect your market exclusivity in that space. Our second program, program 2, or 130401, is our natural phytocannabinoid combination. So it's a combination of THC and CBD in an inhaled device. And we're targeting the orphan indication of trigeminal neuralgia with this drug development program. That's in preclinical development, or rather has almost finished preclinical development now. It'll be phase 1 ready in the early part of Q1 this year. We, as I've previously talked about on these sessions and in other presentations, we chose to pause the clinical phase of this program, which otherwise would have been going into phase 1, so that we can extend that cash runway. And as Paul's helpfully pointed out, that now extends all the way into Q1 of 2024. So the board felt it was a prudent decision, given the market conditions, just to take a pause on that extra spend and give ourselves a bit more time for market conditions to open up. So TN, or trigeminal neuralgia, is, as I mentioned, a very severe facial pain condition. Sufferers can have up to 100 attacks a day, comes on very quickly. So you need a sort of a quick intervention, a method of action that is going to be effective fast, which is why we've gone down the inhaled route, so that people can take that treatment as and when they need it. It's an orphan indication, so that's how you get your market exclusivity. It's the regulatory protection rather than a patent that's required, which is obviously great because it's a natural combination, a phytocannabinoid combination, so there isn't patent protection available, but we get that regulatory protection with the orphan indication designation, and that's 7 years protection in the US and 10 years in the EU and Japan. And the treatment, the market size for TN treatment at the present time is 1.8 billion pounds, and that's again growing at an estimated 6% a year at the moment. In terms of programs 3 and 4, I've talked about these a little bit, but they're at the earlier stage, they're the more discovery stage of our drug development pipeline. Very important, we believe, as a team and at the board level, to continue to develop that pipeline as a pharma company, so that you've got drugs coming through and programs coming through as we progress others into the clinic. So both of these are undisclosed indications at the present time. We are going to be at preclinical stage with one and lead candidate stage with the other. Again, these are patent protection situations, so that's how we would protect the IP or the market exclusivity. And of course, depending on what we end up with a target indication, we may well also, or alternatively rather, go down the regulatory route of protection as well. So just to deep dive a little bit on CIPN, because it is, you know, so important as what we're about to get into our phase 1 for. So as I've said, 461201, or our lead program, is targeting the CIPN market, which is currently worth 1.6 billion. CIPN, or chemotherapy-induced peripheral neuropathy, is the result of damage caused to the sensory neurons, so by chemotherapy medication. So folks who are taking chemo, 60% of folks taking chemo develop CIPN, this sort of hypersensitivity to touch or heat or cold, which really can be prohibitive in terms of either continuing your chemotherapy or just being able to, you know, move around, or it affects your fine motor skills and so on. And it can actually continue even after you've stopped your chemo. So it is a serious problem to solve. There isn't a current treatment out there in the market, and our compound 461201 has shown some really promising data in the preclinical space. So we're very excited about this and about being able to address this significant unmet need, essentially, with our compound. Just to go over the highlights, the operational progress during the period ending 31 October 2022. As I've mentioned, so 461201, the preclinical work that we did with Evotech is now complete and was almost complete at period end. It finished off actually in December. Post period, we've filed our combined clinical trial application. We worked with Simbeck Orion very hard on that. We've had our REC meeting, the ethics committee meeting. That went fine, all progressing as planned. Now we await the MHRA review, and we should have information on that relatively soon. And we're on track for results from that phase 1 in Q2 of this year. So really not long to wait to get the results of that phase 1. For program 2, as I mentioned, preclinical is almost complete. That was the sort of lion's share of the work during the period. It was getting that preclinical done. We were working closely with Charles Rivers, Purisis, and Oz UK to get ourselves across that sort of milestone of completing that preclinical work, so that the compound, the drug device combination is ready for phase 1 during Q1 2023. We won't start that clinical work at this point, but it would be ready to go. We did feel that when we paused the clinical phase of program 2, it was very important to complete the preclinical work so that we had a phase 1 ready asset at the end of it. And so we're delighted with the progress during the period to get us to that point. Programs 3 and 4, as I've mentioned, the work on that sort of more discovery stage part of our drug development program has been ongoing. We've synthesized 50 new derivatives, and our library now totals 475 compounds, which is obviously significant. We've got over 200 CBD compounds, over 100 CBG compounds, just under 30 CBN compounds, and over 100 THC compounds. So that screening work with Dalriada and Oxford STEMtech's really been paying off. It's very much on track. And as I mentioned a bit earlier, we are anticipating having a compound at preclinical stage and a compound ready as a lead candidate during Q2 of this year. So all happening quite soon. Otherwise, other operational highlights. Obviously, there have been some management team changes. We welcomed Paul into the role of finance director in October, and also I stepped into the role of CEO in December, which is obviously post-period end. We also had our first meeting of the Scientific Advisory Board, which was a really important step, really significant to get those key opinion leaders in and sort of specialists in the space to contribute to our clinical strategy to make sure we're aligned with what patients really need. We're actually having another meeting of the SAB very shortly, so that work is ongoing and is very, very helpful. We also onboarded some new brokers, so FinCap came on board as our corporate broker, also Access Capital Markets, and both have been performing really well and giving us some great feedback. So we're delighted to have onboarded both of them. I just want to turn quickly now, I guess, not for too long, but because everybody's seen this timeline slide before, I guess. But I do want to just flag one thing that I think is very important. A key part of our product strategy is to select drug candidates that can be repurposed for multiple indications. And you can see that on the top of this slide. So where you see OCT 461201 at the first line, you'll see it's repeated again and again. That's because this indication, this candidate, I should say, is appropriate for multiple indications. So it's shown potential for CIPN, it's shown potential for IBS, it's got potential in neuropathic pain. And that's great news for two reasons. One, it gives you some downside protection in the event that one of these doesn't unfortunately go forward, which we're hoping isn't the case, but, you know, good to have that downside protection in the event that should happen. But secondly, and I think more excitingly, it's great because it means you've done your phase 1 and you don't then have to repeat it for additional indications. So you can see on the screen here, you know, we've got one phase 1 against CIPN, and then you can go straight into phase 2, and you can go straight into phase 2 for IBS and neuropathic pain, and as many other indications as this compound shows potential for, because you don't have to repeat that phase 1. You go straight into phase 2, which is your dose ranging and efficacy studies, which saves time and it saves cost, gets us closer to commercialization, and obviously moves through inflection points at a faster rate, which is a real advantage, frankly, to the way that we have looked at doing things. So to sum up then, just a couple of points I want to raise before we get into the Q&A. Ultimately here at OCT, what we're trying to do is tackle what is a significant unmet need for non-addictive pain medications. You know, we're all aware of the opioid crisis. We here at OCT are trying to do our small part to alleviate some of that problem. We're creating next generation licensed pain medications that are going through that proper regulatory pathway so they can get approval by FDA and MHRA and so on. We've got those big pharma capabilities because we've worked really hard to build up best-in-class scientific and commercial partnerships across the board, you know, with fantastic companies like Evotec, Simbeck Orion, BCLS, and so on. We've diversified and optimized our pipeline to reduce risk. That's coming back to the point I've just made about having these drug candidates that have got potential in multiple indications. And, you know, we're trying to solve a big problem with a large, you know, unmet need. The opioid crisis is very real, and it's something that we all feel very passionate about. And we are very hopeful that we've got at least a part solution for some of that big problem. Thank you very much for listening to the presentation. Let's, I think, now move to the Q&A portion of the session. I'm very happy just to go through. Let's see the ones we've got in the chat already. Okay, so first question in the chat. FinCap have recently been engaged as financial advisors. Can you please add further detail on what they've been working on and how they are performing to date? Yes, sure. So FinCap on board as corporate brokers. As you might expect, they're doing all the things that a corporate broker would ordinarily do. So giving us advice on strategy. They're talking to us about getting in front of investors for when we are trying to grow the company at the next phase, making sure they're talking to market makers and those types of things, looking after the stock in the marketplace. And just, generally getting our name out there and telling the OCT story, which I think is, really important as the company grows and as we move into the sort of next phase. And everything's going very well so far. We're really delighted to have them on board. They're also putting together, as you'd expect, research, which will be coming out, I think, in line with our phase 1 results. So that's a quick update on FinCap. The second question here, it's noted that states in America have started to legalize the sale of cannabis. You noted in previous presentations you wish to focus equally to the UK on the American consumer market. Can you please tell us more about this, including what financial and time management resources you expect this to consume and how you will deliver this in line with the current financial and staffing restrictions and what end benefits you expect to achieve? Very comprehensive question, that one. It's quite an easy one to answer at this point in time, though. So as we're such early stage, we're not yet in the position where we need to spend a lot of money or build out a team. We're not at the commercialization stage. So when we're looking to do that and we're looking at distribution and commercialization, it's much further down the line, and we'll likely have partnered with somebody, or we would have raised funding in order to build the team out as we need. I think the important part of this question is, why are we focusing on the US? And that's because it is the largest market for our medications. So it's really data driven. It's not to say we're excluding other markets, but that is the sort of the first focus initially, for sure. Okay, let's look at the next one. It was noted in previous shareholder meetings that you have no immediate plans to consolidate or split shares or obtain loans for the company, which could affect the number of shares in distribution. Can you please explain why presently it is not possible to dilute shares to shareholders who may be concerned about dilution on the investor call? Yes. So firstly, I think it's really important to note that the board and the team is very aware of the dilution issue, and clearly when the share price has dropped from its IPO price, we don't want to cause people unnecessary dilution. So when we are looking at a fundraise, which will be sometime in the future, certainly not until we've got our phase 1 results in hand. And as Paul's mentioned, we've got cash all the way to 2024. So there's no sort of burning platform at this point. When we are looking at that, we'll be looking very carefully about how to minimize dilution for shareholders and to make sure we are both raising enough money or partnering in the right way to take the business forward, but at the same time being mindful of that dilution issue. From a technical standpoint, at the moment, we've obviously got the authorizations that stand from the AGM, which is pretty standard for all companies. They go and get authorizations to issue shares for cash up to a certain headroom. The headroom for us is pretty small, so there's not a sort of significant amount of dilution that could take place without any further authority from shareholders. So I think the short answer to the question is, for any significant rights issue, we need to go back to shareholders for consent. So it certainly wouldn't happen without notice and without shareholders having a say. So I think that's probably important to note. Okay, let's have a look at the next one. You have 4 products which you now wish to bring to live trials. Please confirm how you intend to raise funding for these. Well, it's a good question. No magic in it for us. It's the same way that all pharmaceutical companies, pre-revenue pharmaceutical companies, would be looking to raise. So we'll be going out to the market to convince people that we've got a good plan and that we've got good drugs in development and that we're confident of success. and to come and fund our trials. So obviously there are a range of options, aren't there? You know, there's lots of different things that we can do, and you know, partnering opportunities and other ways of funding programs. But I think that the other thing to say is that clearly we'll shortly be in phase 1 with our lead program, and that's very exciting. To get that data in hand for us will be a really nice catalyst, and it's a value inflection point that we'll have moved through, demonstrating that we do deliver, you know, what we say, or what we want to, you know, what we're trying to deliver for shareholders. So I think that's quite significant and important as well. The other thing I guess to say is the remainder of our pipeline, which is continuing to grow thanks to the work we're doing with Dalriada Drug Discovery, who created the Canopy library and whose skills and expertise we're very much leveraging to continue that screening work and to create new compounds. You know, we do require additional funding to take things further, but once we have those phase 1 results in hand, which will be, as I said, Q2 of this year, so not long to wait for that phase 1 data, we'll be in a position where we've got we're ready for phase 2 for one compound, with phase 1 ready with the second. We've got 2 further compounds, one in a preclinical stage and one in lead candidate stage. We've got a growing and promising library of additional compounds. So in terms of asset base, you know, we've really a well-stocked pond then, if you want to put it like that. So I think because we've got that diverse pipeline, we've got options in terms of how we take things forward, not just in how we fund those next steps, but also the next steps that we take. You know, we could, if the market allows, do a larger raise to take more things forward, or if it's more prudent to do a smaller raise or do a different combination to make sure that we are, again, mindful of that dilution issue. Okay, what's the next one? Please also confirm if you've identified any further items from the patent library that you would like to bring to trial, and if so, please explain the reason for this and what performance you expect to gain from each. It would be preemptive of me to share any additional information about that library at the moment. I can say that, you know, it's continued to grow and that we've added 50 derivatives in the period, which is fantastic. It now stands, as I said, at 475 compounds. The great thing about that library is, of course, that the changes, the modifications that we're making with medicinal chemistry enable us to improve things like bioavailability and the stability of the compounds. But, you know, as importantly, they also those changes also give us the benefit of IP protection, making the changes to the chemical structures. That IP protection, therefore, is available. So I can't share anything specific on additional compounds beyond, you know, the 4 programs we've already talked about. But, you know, we're still on track with programs 3 and 4, and we're excited about those. And we're delighted to be continuing to synthesize and adding to that library, which we can only expect will be delivering more and more compounds as time goes on. But nothing specific to share on that one just yet. Okay, next question. Rob Bennett has just joined the company as company secretary and general counsel too, as it turns out. It is noted he has a strong background in sales, mergers and acquisitions. What do you feel are the core skills Rob can offer to the business in both the immediate and the long-term future? So Rob's been a fantastic addition, not least because it means I've been able to take off my general counsel and company secretary hat and focus fully on the interim CEO role, which I'm really delighted to be able to do. He brings a huge amount of experience from his previous roles as general counsel and company secretary at other companies, including Bestway, formerly Cost Cutter. He's got a significant amount of UK and international experience, and yes, a significant amount of M&A experience. Now, obviously, as a pharmaceutical company, we are constantly looking at potential acquisition, potential deals, potential combinations with people. So when and if there's something that comes up we need to share with the market, we'll do that. Rob is very well placed to help us assess those opportunities when they come across our desks, and also to deliver any transaction that may or may not happen in the near term or indeed the long term. So yeah, we're really delighted. He's also got a great background in risk and project management too. So he's a really good addition to the team. Already making an impact in the very short time he's been with us as well. Okay, let me just have a quick look. Couple more questions. Probably time for a couple more. Let's do this one, and I'll see if I can get to one more. There have been no concerns raised on cash flow. However, the current funding was noted to cover phase 1 of your current lead trial. As the start date of this is now expected to be March 2023 instead of January 2023, are there any concerns on cash flow, or are you confident that finance will be secured to continue operating as a business? So there's a couple of things in answer to this question. Firstly, absolutely no concerns on cash flow. I think Paul's made it super clear that we've got that runway through to Q1 2024. And that's been as a result of some very careful managing of cash and some hard work from the team. So it's hats off to the team, really. The important thing to note there is that our phase 1 is fully funded. So that's included in that cash runway and in the budget that we have remaining and that takes us through to Q1 of 2024. Timing wise, everything is on track for that phase 1. So there's a sort of suggestion in that question that there's been a delay. I think actually it's more of a communication on what we all mean by start time or kickoff, really, rather than a delay. So for us, actually submitting that clinical trial application, which happened on the 4th of January, for us was the sort of kickoff of that phase 1 process. So that did sort of start in January. And of course, without that, we couldn't be getting into dosing our healthy volunteers, which is scheduled to take place in March, all being well, with the MHRA review, which we are expecting. So we've given conservative timeframes there because you want to build in a bit of margin for just for prudence, really. But obviously what happened in January was submission of that CTA, which does really kickstart things. And of course, we've had the REC meeting, the ethics committee meeting, which went well. Everything's going forward as planned. Just waiting for that MHRA feedback, which could be any day. And of course, in the background, the team's working really hard to make sure as soon as that drops, we're ready to press go and get those healthy volunteers into the clinic, essentially. Right, a couple more questions maybe I can just do. Let's do one more here. Hello, can you tell us more about the phase 1 design would look like, please? Is it only in healthy volunteers? Assuming phase 1 goes well, is the idea to run a phase 2 yourself only or with a partner abroad? Okay, good question. So yes, phase 1 is healthy volunteers, absolutely right. As phase 1 is all about safety and tolerability, so it goes into healthy volunteers. Which means they are quite efficient and quick to run because it's quite easy to recruit those healthy volunteers. So you recruit healthy volunteers as soon as you've got the MHRA approval, everything is in line for that. And you're right, assuming it goes well, we will absolutely be gearing up to run our phase 2. It might be that we do that abroad. It might be that we do that in the UK. No decisions have been made on that as of yet. We will start working on that as soon as we've kicked off and got that MHRA approval. So yeah, lots of work to do on that phase 1. It's a really exciting period for us here at OCT this first quarter and certainly the first half of 2023, with lots of big stuff happening and no doubt lots more opportunities to communicate with our investors. Thank you everybody for submitting those questions, and hopefully I've answered them to the best of my ability and given you a bit of comfort on the ones that you have submitted.
Yes, Clarissa, thank you very much. I think you addressed those questions you can from investors. And of course, the company will review all questions submitted today and will publish those responses on the Investor Meet Company platform. But just before redirecting investors to provide you with their feedback, which I know is particularly important to the company, Clarissa, could I just ask you for a few closing comments?
Yeah, sure. So firstly, again, just a word of thanks to everybody for taking the time to join us this afternoon. I appreciate your afternoons are precious, so it's great to have so many people take an interest. And that feedback, I think, is super important to us. So please do share anything that you would like to see more of, or see less of. That's very important to us and really helps inform how we communicate with our investors, and how we will continue to communicate with our investors in 2023. And then just operationally, I would say, we are very well placed for a good start and a good rest of 2023. The groundwork really was laid in 2022 with the work, the period that we're talking about in particular, all that preclinical work, getting that done on time and on budget so that we could get to that phase 1 as we're doing right now, on time and again, sort of on track, and also enabling us to extend that cash runway all the way through to Q1 of next year. So some really exciting times to come, and really appreciate you all sticking with us.
Clarissa, Paul, thanks once again for updating investors today. Could I please ask investors not to close this session, as you'll now be automatically redirected to provide your feedback in order that the management team can better understand your views and expectations. This will only take a few moments to complete, but I'm sure will be greatly valued by the company. On behalf of the management team of Oxford Cannabinoid Technologies Holdings PLC, we'd like to thank you for attending today's presentation, and good evening to you all.